What's up guys, it's Tom here and welcome to a very interesting video where we will talk about the closed Champions League, which will potentially come into effect as early as 2024, so just 4 years or 5 years from now. And this is a very serious proposal that is already on UEFA's table, and this is already a detailed, concrete plan pushed mainly by Italian and Spanish teams, mainly by Juventus, Milan, Inter, and also Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona. And this would, in my opinion, destroy European football as we know it. And we are talking about this in the week that was potentially the best week, the most entertaining week of European football that I can remember, with 2 Champions League semi-finals second leg comebacks from 3-0 down. So in this video we will talk in detail about this proposal and what it could mean, especially for smaller nations. But I find this greed absolutely despicable and disgraceful, because this would prevent the fairy tale stories that we have seen so often. This would prevent Ajax from playing in the Champions League in the near future. This would prevent a story like Leicester City even qualifying for the Champions League. This would prevent the story of Monaco going into the semi-finals of the Champions League a few years ago. And I absolutely hate that. Football shouldn't be just for 24 elite clubs and the rest will feed on very little. That's just not how it should work. The current system, I think, is very good. Let's analyze the proposal and what it means. So that would mean that 24 big clubs would automatically qualify for next year's Champions League every season, effectively guaranteeing them annual participation each year and tens of millions of pounds in broadcasting revenue, and their domestic rivals wouldn't receive that. So that would open up an even bigger gap in each league, and some of the leagues wouldn't get an automatic Champions League qualification, because I mean this would ruin some teams like it's crazy. Like, for example, Paris Saint-Germain want to take part in the Champions League every year. That's fair enough, but they haven't been to a Champions League semi-final even with their investment. On the other hand, teams like Ajax, like Monaco, have been to a Champions League semi-final because they played so well in that season, and they wouldn't even be able to qualify into the Champions League. I mean, Ajax, who are, in my opinion, a huge club, they won 4 Champions Leagues already. That's as many as Manchester United, Chelsea, Arsenal and Tottenham combined. So 4 of the top 6 clubs in the Premier League won as many Champions League trophies as Ajax, and Ajax wouldn't be even in the Champions League if this is passed, which I find really unacceptable. The biggest clubs are pushing this, especially from Spain and Italy, because their domestic leagues don't get as much money as the Premier League. And I think Spain get a lot of money from the broadcasting revenue, but Italy maybe not so much, and they are pushing this so they get even more money, and this would even open up a bigger gap. And I already find it very disappointing that Juventus won 9 Serie A titles in a row. I mean, every year the title race is non-existent in the Serie A, which is very sad. But if Juventus are guaranteed to be in the Champions League every year, no matter how they do, and even Milan and Inter, I mean AC Milan haven't qualified for the Champions League in God knows how many years, but because they won a lot of Champions League previously, they would be guaranteed a place in the Champions League. And not because they are good enough, but because they have a big name, a big brand. And I hate that proposal, honestly. And this proposal matches the aim of the influential European Club Association, whose strategy is directed by several very rich, very big clubs. And also this draft plan suggests that only 4 Champions League teams will be relegated to next season's second-tier Europa League. So if you want to qualify for the Champions League, it won't be through the domestic leagues and how they finish. And that is what I find the most annoying. like Wolves, for example, who want to break into the top 4 in the Premier League. Even if they break into the top 4, they won't qualify for the Champions League because the big Champions League places are already divided among Manchester United, Liverpool, maybe Chelsea and Manchester City, and maybe even Arsenal get a place. I'm not really sure, but that would be that's just ludicrous. Like Leicester City could, in theory, win the Premier League again and not be able to play in the Champions League. Like how? And listen to the Spanish league president, Javier Tebas. This is what he said. We cannot accept that these are just plans and proposals for an open discussion with stakeholders about the future of professional football. In reality, we were presented with a concrete project developed by UEFA in full cooperation with a small group of rich and powerful European clubs to reform European club competitions after 2024 in a format that could destroy domestic competitions and the sporting and financial sustainability of the vast majority of clubs in Europe. And what Tebas said here, and I listened to this and I quote him, "We are open for a constructive dialogue to reform European football together with other stakeholders, but if this is the project on the table, then the margins for negotiations are very limited." So according to the Spanish league president, the margin for negotiations are very limited. So already they have a concrete plan that they want to push through and accept, and I think that is very, very worrying. Because as I said, this would exclude the vast majority of clubs in Europe. And I find that very, very sad. And if this happens, that could be the end of a very exciting stories in football. And not just that, but a lot of smaller sides in Europe rely on Champions League and Europa League revenue, and this would really, really screw up, in my opinion, the current great system of European football. And I would really, really, really hate that to see, honestly, like champions from lower profile leagues like in the Netherlands, Belgium, Portugal, even most of Eastern Europe, as well as elite league clubs outside the top 4 or 5 spots in their domestic competitions. Like, for example, Tottenham could be not included in this because they are not like a quote-unquote big club, but Tottenham have consistently finished in the top 4 in the past 4 or 5 seasons. And just because in their previous like 20, 30, 40 years, they haven't been a top club in England, they should be excluded of the Champions League. They are good enough to get to the Champions League final, but because they are not a big brand, they should be excluded from the Champions League in the future. Like, that is ludicrous to me. You can't build up a smaller club like this in the future, and that is everything that is wrong with this proposal, in my opinion. You should have a chance to take a smaller club with great management, great recruitment, great decisions, a long-term vision like they are doing at Tottenham. I mean, they haven't spent any money in the past 2 transfer windows and they were still good enough to qualify for the Champions League final. And these stories would be just denied with this proposal. So that's why I'm really, really angry about this. And UEFA have been in talks about this for months with the European Club Association, as I said, that is directed by the biggest clubs in Europe. And that group is led by Juventus chairman Andrea Agnelli, and he is driving the campaign to revamp the Champions League into basically an elite, exclusive, closed competition. And I hate that idea. And I just wanted to let all my anger out and all my thoughts out. And even after the meeting, Alexander Ceferin, who is the UEFA president, said, "At the moment we have only ideas and opinions, but these are already concrete plans on the table of UEFA." And now many newspapers are reporting this, the New York Times, the Telegraph, the Eurosport website, everybody's reporting this at the moment. I would even expand the Champions League to as many as maybe 48 teams to bring more smaller sides to play in the group stage, and if one or two of them could qualify for the knockout stages, it would really help them out financially. But what this proposal would do is that to allow the top 24 teams in Europe to qualify automatically every year for the Champions League, and just 4 places would be up for grabs for smaller nations in the 32 Champions League teams, and the other smaller sides would be relegated to Europa League football. And also the current sides, some of them in Europa League, would be relegated to a Europa League 2 tournament with 64 teams from smaller nations. That would effectively guarantee the big clubs, and Juventus president are pushing this idea very hard, and also Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona. They want a bigger guarantee of getting big money every year, because the broadcasting revenue of the Champions League would always go to the bigger clubs, and there would be almost no chance for any smaller team to compete for the domestic titles, or even compete to qualify even for the Champions League, which I find an absolutely disgraceful idea. And I'm a Liverpool fan. This would benefit Liverpool financially, but I don't want to exclude all the smaller clubs, because I think the romance of domestic football is that if you do well, you could qualify for the Champions League if you have a miracle season, just like Leicester City did. And in fact, Leicester City, after qualifying for the Champions League by winning the Premier League, did so well. They were actually the English club who went the furthest in the Champions League the next season, which I think was a really awesome fairy tale story. So I find this very hard to accept, and I think there should be massive protests if this new UEFA Champions League format is put into place. And I think many fans should do something very drastic to wake UEFA up, that you shouldn't change the system so much that smaller sides won't even be able to have a chance to get into the Champions League. I mean, that's just, I'm just furious by this. How greedy is that from the top clubs and what they want. And 4 enterprises. So these 4 places, which would be the worst 4 teams in the Champions League, would be relegated next year to the Europa League, and the 4 best teams in the Europa League would get promoted to the Champions League. So basically, whoever gets into the Europa League semi-finals, those 4 teams next season would be able to play in the Champions League. But for example, it would leave the Eredivisie, the Dutch league, second place team, no route into the competition. So Ajax, if they don't win the league and PSV Eindhoven win the league, Ajax wouldn't be able to have a place in the Champions League, even though the Eredivisie, the Dutch league, has enough coefficient, so they have now 2 places in the Champions League, 1 in the group stage and 1 in the qualifiers. Ajax went through like 2 or 3 qualifiers to get into the Champions League, and they were like 10 seconds away from getting to the Champions League final. And this new proposal, if it gets accepted, and then in 2024 the second place team in the Eredivisie and maybe like even in the French league, the third place team in the French league, or even the second place team in the French league, won't be able to even qualify for the Champions League, which I find that really annoying, and I find it unacceptable. I think every football fan should do something by protesting against this idea, and I'm just making this video to raise awareness. The good news is that Sam Wallace is reporting in the Telegraph that the Premier League clubs have agreed to reject this proposal, and that makes me very happy that the Premier League doesn't want this to happen. And including the big 6 Premier League clubs, they quickly reached a consensus at a shareholder meeting in London that they will oppose this idea. So the likes of Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Man City, Arsenal, Tottenham, they reject this idea, even though that would benefit them. But that is not what football is about. Football traditionally should be a game to have an equal opportunity. It's 11 players against 11 players on the pitch, and it always should be decided on the pitch who wins. It shouldn't be decided by board members in a room where they decide. The big clubs, the big brands always get to play in the Champions League. And if they have a bad season in the domestic league, if somebody like AC Milan finish in mid-table in the Serie A, which they have done previously, they will still qualify for the Champions League because they are AC Milan. So let's say somebody like Lazio or Fiorentina, they have a great season. They finish in 3rd or 2nd place in the Serie A. Because they don't have as big a brand as AC Milan, they shouldn't play in the Champions League next year. Like, what the hell is that all about? That's what is crazy about this. That, for example, there is a very good story about this. Like the Saint Etienne owner said some very interesting things about this, because he was actually talking to some investors who wanted to invest money into Saint Etienne, who are the biggest club in France in terms of they've won the most league titles. And yes, the last league title was in 1981, so maybe not many English fans know that Saint Etienne are such a huge club in France. But he said, this Saint Etienne French owner, I really like his idea. The objective of football is to give happiness to fans, and to give happiness is to have a chance of winning. And he is worried that the proposed Champions League change and overhaul would leave new owners with no reason to invest money into Saint Etienne, because new owners are about to take over the club. And of course, these investors, the new investors, will consider, if we close the system, then that of course they could suddenly be outside of that. And even if Saint Etienne finish 3rd or 2nd, because they are not considered a big club by this system, they won't be allowed into the Champions League. And that, I find that ridiculous. I find that very, very annoying. And who chooses which are the big clubs in Europe and which are not? I think there should be really no change into the system. Right now the Champions League, I think, has a very good system, and as I said, I would even expand the tournament to include more smaller sides, because in one year or another we could have some fairy tale runs in the Champions League, and I think that should happen. For example, Red Star Belgrade, who would have thought that they got into the Champions League via the qualifiers, and they have actually beaten Liverpool, the Champions League finalists, 2-time finalists now. And with this new proposal, that wouldn't be allowed. The teams like Red Star Belgrade wouldn't be allowed near the Champions League, and they wouldn't be able to witness miracle games like that. I mean, Red Star Belgrade on paper shouldn't be close to Liverpool, but they could actually beat them. And I think that's a marvelous, magnificent fact, that there could be a small team who could do a miracle once in a while. It could happen that a great small team gets to the Champions League knockout stages, gets to the quarterfinals even. And that could mean so much financially to those smaller sides. But no, the big clubs want all the money to themselves, even though these big clubs are already filthy rich and they could already buy the best players. And this is also pushed by Agnelli, the main culprit in this. He is the Juventus president. But let me know what you think about this in the comments below, and thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. See you later. Goodbye.